The air recyclers hummed quietly as Alex finished unpacking his small bag in the cramped quarters. Through the tiny porthole, he could see the massive bulk of Harmony Ridge Station spinning slowly against the star field. After 18 months of travel from Earth, he still couldn't believe they had actually made it to the first interspecies diplomatic meeting in human history. Down the corridor, something roared. The sound made his teeth ache and sent ice through his veins. Alex had heard recordings during the briefings, but experiencing a Ravaki battle cry in person was different. Much different. Captain Reed appeared in the doorway looking tired, but determined. "They've assigned us to Level 7, she said quietly. "Tom checked the station layout. That's where they put the maintenance crews and food suppliers." "Charming," Alex muttered, pulling on his dress uniform jacket. As the mission's historian and cultural advisor, he knew exactly what this placement meant. The galactic predator species were putting humanity firmly at the bottom of their food chain. The mess hall occupied a vast section of Level 3, with soaring ceilings that made Alex feel like an ant. Massive tables were arranged in a careful pattern, each one sized for different species. The largest table dominated the center, clearly meant for the Ravaki delegation. These 12-foot reptilian giants sat with perfect predator stillness, their golden eyes tracking every movement in the room. At a smaller but equally imposing table, the Threx Collective maintained their eerie unity. The insectoid creatures moved with synchronized precision, their compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights like jewels. When one lifted its head, all 12 did the same motion at exactly the same moment. Alex suppressed a shiver. The Vorth delegation occupied a table, made of some crystalline material that resonated with their own mineral bodies. They appeared almost ghost-like, occasionally flickering in and out of phase with reality. Alex watched one reach through its chair to scratch an itch, treating solid matter like suggestions. Then there was the human table. Small, tucked in a corner with regular metal chairs that looked borrowed from a cafeteria. Tom waved them over with forced cheerfulness, but Alex could see the strain around his eyes. Gorthak rose from the Ravaki table, all 12 feet of scaled muscle and barely contained violence. His voice carried easily across the enormous room without any apparent effort. "Representatives of the minor species," he rumbled, not bothering to look directly at the humans. "You will observe protocol. When apex species speak, you remain silent. Your quarters are adequate for your needs. Questions?" Reed stood, and Alex admired how she managed to look dignified despite barely reaching Gorthak's elbow. "We understand the protocols, Overseer. We're here to learn." "Indeed you are." Gorthak's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "Your species shows wisdom in recognizing its place." The first formal session took place in a council chamber that could have housed a small city. Each delegation sat behind curved desks arranged in tiers, with the most dangerous species at the top. Humanity occupied the bottom row, alongside 2 other species that Alex recognized as recent additions to galactic civilization. The discussion focused on territorial boundaries and resource allocation. The predator species spoke with casual certainty about carving up space, treating entire star systems like personal property. They referenced previous conquests with the same tone humans might use to discuss weekend plans. "The Kepler sector fell to us in a standard month," reported a Threx speaker, its voice buzzing with harmonic overtones. 17 inhabited worlds. The indigenous populations were efficiently processed. Alex felt his stomach turn. Efficiently processed. He glanced at Reed, who maintained perfect diplomatic composure while taking notes. Tom stared at his hands, jaw tight. During the break, the predator species clustered in their respective groups, radiating confidence and barely contained aggression. They moved through the corridors like they owned them, which Alex supposed they did. Other species stepped aside automatically, some actually bowing as the apex predators passed. The humans walked back to their quarters in relative isolation. Nobody stepped aside for them. A few maintenance workers nodded politely, recognizing fellow bottom feeders in the station hierarchy. "How are we supposed to negotiate with them?" Tom asked once they were safely behind closed doors. "They think we're walking snacks." "Maybe that's an advantage," Alex said thoughtfully. "Nobody considers a snack to be a threat." Reed looked up from her notes. "What do you mean?" "Well, they've already decided we're harmless. That means they might actually listen to what we have to say instead of just posturing for dominance. They're not competing with us because they don't think we're worth competing with." The second day brought another formal session, this one focused on trade agreements. The predator species discussed exchange rates for raw materials, with particular emphasis on what they called protein sources. Alex tried not to think too hard about what that meant. Halfway through the session, Gorthak turned his massive head toward the human delegation. "The newcomers have been silent," he observed, voice carrying a note of amusement. "Do you perhaps have opinions on these matters?" Reed stood again. "We're still learning the context of galactic trade. We appreciate the opportunity to observe." "Observe," repeated one of the Vorth, its crystalline voice chiming like broken glass. "How quaint. Most species either dominate or submit. You seem content to simply watch." "Humans are good at watching," Alex found himself saying. The words were out. Before he could stop them, and suddenly every predator in the room was staring directly at him. "We've been doing it for a very long time." Gorthak's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Alex felt his mouth go dry, but Reed nodded encouragingly. "Well, we tell stories about what we watch. It's how we remember things, how we teach our children what to expect from the world." "Stories," buzzed the Threx Collective, the word rippling through all 12 speakers. "About what?" "About everything," Alex said, gaining confidence. "About the world we come from, about the things that happen to people, about how to survive." The predators exchanged glances. Survival stories from prey species were apparently something new. "Perhaps," Gorthak said slowly, "you might share one of these stories to help us understand your species better." Alex looked at Reed, who shrugged almost imperceptibly. They were already at the bottom of the hierarchy. How much lower could they go? "All right," Alex said. "Let me tell you about Little Red Riding Hood." The dining hall fell into an unusual quiet as Alex cleared his throat. Even the constant background hum of the station's systems seemed to fade away. 12 pairs of Ravaki eyes focused on him with predatory intensity, while the Threx Collective tilted their heads in perfect unison. The Vorth delegates flickered more solidly into phase, apparently curious enough to pay full attention to the physical world. "There was once a little girl who lived near a dark forest," Alex began, his voice carrying further than he expected in the vast space. "Her grandmother was sick, so her mother sent her through the forest with food and medicine." Gorthak's massive form shifted slightly. "The parent sent a juvenile into dangerous territory alone?" "The girl wasn't afraid," Alex continued. "She knew the forest paths well, but on this day she met a wolf. The Threx Collective made a sound like rustling paper. One of them spoke with their harmonic buzz. Wolf, predator species from your world? Yes. Large, powerful, with sharp teeth and claws. Much stronger than a human child." Alex noticed how the predators perked up at this detail. "The wolf was hungry, and he wanted to eat the girl. But he was clever, so he didn't attack right away. Instead, he asked her where she was going." Interrogation. "Before consumption," noted a Vorth delegate with approval. "Efficient hunting technique." The girl told him about her sick grandmother. The wolf realized he could eat them both if he played his cards right. So he told the girl to take her time, to pick flowers along the way. Then he ran ahead to the grandmother's house. Alex paused to take a sip of water, noting how completely still the room had become. These apex predators were genuinely interested in a story about hunting tactics. The wolf ate the grandmother, then put on her clothes and got into her bed. When the little girl arrived, she noticed something was wrong. The grandmother looked different. "Oh, grandmother," said the girl, "what big eyes you have." The wolf said, "All the better to see you with." The girl said, "What big ears you have." The wolf said, "All the better to hear you with." Then the girl said, "What big teeth you have." Gorthak leaned forward slightly, clearly anticipating the conclusion. "All the better to eat you with," said the wolf, and he jumped out of bed to grab the girl. "Successful hunt," rumbled Gorthak, with what might have been satisfaction. "Well, that's where it gets interesting," Alex said. "See, there was a woodsman nearby who heard the commotion. He broke down the door with his axe, killed the wolf and cut open its belly. Both the grandmother and the little girl were still alive inside." The silence stretched longer this time. Several of the Ravaki exchanged glances, while the Threx Collective seemed to be processing this information with unusual difficulty. "The prey items survived consumption?" asked one of the Vorth, its crystalline voice carrying a note of confusion. "They did, and the girl filled the wolf's belly with stones before they sewed it back up. So when the wolf woke up and tried to drink water, the weight dragged it into the river and it drowned." Tom picked up his fork and continued eating as if nothing unusual had happened. Reed nodded approvingly at Alex, clearly pleased with his storytelling. But the predator species seemed genuinely disturbed by the tale's conclusion. "This is a story you tell to children?" asked the lead Threx delegate. "Oh yes," Alex said cheerfully. "It's quite popular. Teaches them not to talk to strangers and to pay attention when something seems wrong. You teach your juveniles to expect survival after being consumed by predators," said Gorthak slowly, as if testing the concept. "Well, we teach them that there's usually a way out if you're clever enough to find it," Alex agreed, "even from situations that look hopeless." The next evening, Tom took a turn at storytelling during the meal break. He chose The Three Little Pigs, describing how the first two houses were easily destroyed by the wolf, but the third pig's brick house proved impregnable. "So the wolf climbed down the chimney," Tom explained, "but the smart pig had put a big pot of boiling water at the bottom. The wolf fell in, and that was the end of him." The prey species successfully defended against a superior predator using prepared fortifications and traps, summarized a Threx speaker. "Right. And that pig's brothers moved in with him, so they all learned from the experience." "Learned," repeated Gorthak thoughtfully. Captain Reed shared the next story during a break in trade negotiations. She told them about Goldilocks, the human girl who broke into the bears' house, ate their food, broke their furniture, and slept in their beds. When the bears came home and found her, she jumped out the window and ran away. Reed concluded. "The juvenile human invaded the territory of multiple large predators and survived?" asked a Vorth delegate. "She did. Bears are very dangerous on our world, much larger than humans with powerful claws and teeth. But Goldilocks was quick and clever." The predators seemed increasingly uncomfortable with these stories. Each tale followed a similar pattern. Humans, especially young humans, encountered dangerous predators and either escaped, defeated them, or sometimes both. "These are educational materials for your species?" Gorthak asked during the third day's session. "Children's stories," Alex confirmed. "We tell them before bedtime, usually. They help kids understand the world they live in." "What kind of world requires children to learn tactical responses to predator encounters?" asked the Threx Collective with their buzzing harmony. "Our world," Reed said simply. "Earth. We evolved alongside many dangerous species. Large cats, bears, wolves, venomous snakes, disease-carrying insects, hostile weather patterns. Humans had to get very good at surviving things that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than we were." "But you survived," observed one of the Vorth. We did more than survive, Tom added casually while reviewing his notes. We thrived. There are billions of us now. The room fell quiet again. Alex noticed that the predator species were beginning to look at the humans differently. Not with respect, exactly, but with something that might have been uncertainty. That night, Alex overheard part of a conversation between two Ravaki delegates outside their quarters. They were speaking in their own language, but the translation device picked up fragments, unusual response patterns, and prey behavior inconsistent with species classification. When he mentioned this to Reed, she smiled grimly. Good. Let them wonder. The fourth day brought a request that surprised everyone. Gorthak approached their table directly, his massive bulk casting a shadow over the human delegation. We would hear more of these survival stories, he said without preamble. To better understand human psychology. Alex glanced at his companions, who both nodded encouragingly. What kind of story would you like to hear? Tell us about your most dangerous predators, Gorthak rumbled, and how your people deal with them. Alex thought for a moment, then smiled. It was time to tell them about dragons. Alex stood before the assembled predator species in what had become an impromptu storytelling session. The formal diplomatic meetings had been suspended by mutual agreement, replaced by these strange cultural exchanges. The aliens seemed fascinated by human stories, though Alex was beginning to suspect their interest wasn't entirely academic. Dragons, he began, are the most dangerous creatures in human imagination. They're massive reptiles, much larger than your Ravaki friends here, with armored scales that can turn aside any weapon. They breathe fire hot enough to melt stone, fly faster than any bird, and possess intelligence that rivals or exceeds our own. The Vorth delegates flickered more solidly into phase, their crystalline bodies resonating with interest. Hypothetical. Predators? We made them up, Alex confirmed. Created them in our stories and legends. But here's the thing. In every dragon story, there's always a human who decides to fight it. Gorthak's golden eyes narrowed. Fight a superior predator? That demonstrates poor survival instincts. You'd think so, Alex agreed. But these humans don't just fight dragons randomly. They usually have a reason. The dragon is terrorizing a village, or hoarding treasure that belongs to people, or demanding human sacrifices. So someone, often just a regular person with basic weapons, decides to stop it. Unsuccessful attacks, surely, buzzed the Threx collective. Actually, the humans usually win. Alex let this sink in for a moment. They study the dragon's habits, find its weak points, set traps, or sometimes just march up to its lair with a sword and shield. They figure out how to ground a flying enemy, how to get past armor that should be impenetrable, how to avoid fire breath that should be unavoidable. Tom leaned forward from his seat. Tell them about St. George. Right. St. George was a soldier who came to a town that was being terrorized by a dragon. The dragon demanded tribute, gold, livestock, and eventually people. The town was running out of sacrifices, and the king's daughter was chosen to be fed to the dragon. Acceptable loss to preserve the larger population, noted a Ravaki delegate, approvingly. George didn't think so. He rode out to meet the dragon when it came for the princess. This was a creature that could burn down entire buildings, that had armor no weapon could pierce, that could fly and had claws like swords. Suicide, declared Gorthak flatly. George killed it with a spear through the throat. One thrust, right between the scales where the armor was weakest. He'd watched the dragon, figured out its anatomy, and waited for the perfect moment. The predators exchanged uneasy glances. Alex pressed on. But that's just one story. We have hundreds of them. Dragon slayers, giant killers, monster hunters, regular humans who look at impossible odds and find ways to win. Captain Reed stood up smoothly. Alex, why don't you tell them about historical examples? Real events, not stories. Alex nodded, understanding her direction. Well, There was the Black Death, a plague that swept across our world about 700 years ago. It killed roughly 1/3 of all humans alive at the time. Plague warfare, said a Threx speaker with professional interest. Biological. Weapons are highly effective against organic species. This wasn't warfare. It was just disease. Bacteria spread by fleas on rats. We didn't even understand what was killing us for most of it. People just started dying by the millions. Population collapse, observed Gorthak. Standard evolutionary pressure. The species should have gone extinct or been reduced to scattered survivors. That's what you'd expect, Alex agreed. But we didn't collapse. We adapted. People learned to quarantine infected areas, burn contaminated materials, avoid certain trade routes. Some communities sealed themselves off completely until the plague passed. And then? Then we rebuilt. Within a few generations, our population was higher than it had been before the plague. We came back stronger, with better understanding of disease and better systems for dealing with it. Reed took over the narrative. That's actually a pattern with humans. We've survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years, floods that covered entire continents. Each time we lose massive numbers of people, but the survivors learn from the experience and come back. Impossible, stated one of the Vorth delegates. No species recovers from population reduction of that magnitude. Humans do, Tom said quietly. We've done it multiple times. In fact, there's genetic evidence that at one point our entire species was reduced to maybe 10,000 individuals total. And you survived that bottleneck. Obviously, Reed said with a slight smile. Here we are. Over the following days, the storytelling sessions became a regular part of the diplomatic schedule. The predator species requested more and more examples of human resilience, and the humans obliged. Alex told them about the voyage of the Endurance, where explorers became trapped in Antarctic ice for nearly 2 years. Their ship was crushed, they were stranded on moving ice floes 1,000 miles from land, with no communication and no hope of rescue. The temperature dropped to -40 degrees. Unsurvivable conditions, noted a Ravaki delegate. They all made it home alive. They hiked across the ice, sailed small boats through some of the most dangerous waters on our planet, and crossed unmapped mountains. The leader, Ernest Shackleton, brought back every single member of his crew. Tom shared stories of human space exploration. We started by strapping ourselves to controlled explosions and shooting into space. The early rockets failed more often than they succeeded. Astronauts knew they had maybe a 50-50 chance of making it back alive. They volunteered for those odds. They competed for the chance. We had thousands of applicants for every position. Reed described human military history, the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held off an army of hundreds of thousands. The Siege of Leningrad, where a city survived nearly 3 years of starvation and bombardment. The Warsaw Ghetto, uprising, where people with no hope of victory fought anyway because surrender meant death. Your species appears to have unusual reactions to hopeless situations, observed Gorthak during one session. How so? Most rational beings would submit to superior force to preserve their lives. Humans seem to resist. We don't like being told we can't do something, Alex said, even when the thing telling us is reality itself. The aliens were becoming visibly uncomfortable with these stories. The Threx Collective had begun exhibiting signs of agitation, their synchronized movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. The Vorth delegates flickered in and out of phase more frequently, and several Ravaki had started unconsciously flexing their claws. Tell me, Gorthak said slowly, what does your species fear? Surely there must be something that makes humans submit. Alex looked at Reed, who nodded slightly. They'd been building up to this question for days. That's an interesting question, Alex said thoughtfully. Let me tell you about the things humans are afraid of. Maybe that will help you understand us better. But instead of backing down, he smiled in a way that made several of the aliens shift uncomfortably. We're afraid of a lot of things, but here's what makes it interesting. We don't let being afraid stop us from doing what needs to be done. The atmosphere in the council chamber had changed dramatically over the past week. Where once the predator species had lounged with casual dominance, they now sat with visible tension. The humans remained in their assigned seats at the bottom tier, but somehow the power dynamics had shifted in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Tom picked up the storytelling thread during the morning session, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Since you asked about fear, let me tell you about something that happened in our early space program. We sent 3 men to orbit our moon, 250,000 miles from Earth. The Threx Collective leaned forward with their unsettling synchronized movement. Standard exploration mission? Not exactly. See, they were flying in a capsule that had experienced multiple failures during testing. The heat shield, the only thing protecting them from burning up during re-entry, had cracked on previous flights. The guidance system was primitive by our current standards. The communication equipment was unreliable. They should have waited for better technology, observed a Vorth delegate. They probably should have, Tom agreed. But they wanted to beat their competitors to the moon, so they went anyway, knowing that if anything went wrong, they'd die alone in the cold vacuum of space, too far from Earth for anyone to help them. Gorthak's massive head tilted slightly. They accepted certain death for territorial dominance? Not even that. They went for knowledge, to see what was out there, to prove it could be done. Tom paused to sip his water. The mission succeeded, but just barely. On the way back, one of their fuel cells exploded. They lost most of their power and had to shut down nearly all their systems to conserve what was left. Mission failure, stated a Ravaki delegate. They improvised. Used the moonlander as a lifeboat, jury-rigged air filters from spare parts, calculated a new flight path using manual calculations when their computers failed. They made it home, but it was close. If they'd made different choices at several key points, they would have died. And this terrified your species into abandoning space exploration? Asked the Threx Collective hopefully. No. We sent more missions. Lots more. We've had explosions, equipment failures, people dying during training. We keep going anyway. Alex stood up to take over the narrative. That's actually normal for humans. We're afraid of death, pain, failure, isolation, all the things you'd expect. But fear doesn't stop us from doing what we want to do. Irrational, declared Gorthak. Maybe. Let me give you another example. Humans used to cross our oceans in wooden ships powered by wind. These vessels were maybe 100 feet long, sailing across thousands of miles of open water where storms could sink them without warning. Reed opened her tablet and pulled up historical records. We have documentation of early sea voyages. Mortality rates of 30 to 50% were common. Everyone who signed on for these expeditions knew that roughly half of them wouldn't be coming back. They went anyway, Alex continued. They explored every ocean, mapped every coastline, found every island. When they ran out of places to explore on the surface, they started diving to the ocean floor in metal containers that could be crushed by water pressure. Your species appears to have a death wish, observed one of the Vorth, its crystalline voice ringing with what might have been concern. Not a death wish, Alex corrected. We just don't let death have the final say in what we do with our lives. Tom pulled out his own tablet. Here's something interesting. We have records of early polar expeditions, humans who decided to walk across the most hostile environments on our planet just to see what was there. The Donner Party, he read, was a group of settlers trying to cross a mountain range during winter. They got trapped by snow and ran out of food. Some of them survived by eating the ones who died. Several of the aliens made sounds of disgust. But Tom continued. The interesting part is that other groups kept trying the same route, even after hearing what happened. They just prepared better. We have a saying, Reed added. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. We learn by failing, then trying again. Alex took the conversation in a darker direction. You want to know what really scares humans? Let me tell you about our monsters. The council chamber fell completely silent. We create fictional creatures specifically to frighten ourselves. We make up stories about things that hunt humans in the dark, that can't be killed by normal weapons, that turn people into monsters themselves. Why would you do that? Asked Gorthak, genuine bewilderment in his voice. Entertainment, we tell. These stories around campfires, write books about them, make visual recordings. We pay money to sit in dark rooms and watch stories designed to terrify us. Your species seeks out fear? We cultivate it. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Vampires that drink human blood and can only be killed with wooden stakes. Zombies, reanimated corpses that spread their condition by biting the living. Werewolves that transform during the full moon and hunt their own families. The Threx Collective was making that rustling paper sound again, more aggressively now. Alex pressed on. We have creatures called Lovecraftian horrors, beings so alien and powerful that just seeing them drives humans insane. We invented gods of chaos and destruction that exist only to cause suffering. We created the concept of hell, eternal torment, designed specifically for human consciousness. And you find this enjoyable? The Vorth delegate's voice cracked slightly across multiple harmonics. Some humans do. Others prefer different kinds of fear. We have stories about serial killers. Humans who hunt other humans for pleasure. About plagues that turn people into cannibals. About artificial intelligences that decide to exterminate their creators. Reed leaned back in her chair. The point is, we don't just survive the things that try to kill us. We imagine new and worse. Things that could kill us, then figure out how to survive those too. You test your own fear responses, said Gorthak slowly, as if trying to understand an alien concept. We push ourselves to see how much we can take. Physical pain, psychological trauma, social isolation, existential dread. We explore all of it. Not because we have to, but because we want to know our own limits, Tom added quietly. And then we try to exceed those limits. The predator species were no longer making eye contact with the humans. Several of the Ravaki had unconsciously moved their chairs back from the table. The Vorth delegates were flickering more rapidly between phases, and the Threx Collective seemed to be having some kind of internal disagreement that was making their movements increasingly erratic. I think, said Alex conversationally, you're starting to understand why humans don't make very good prey. We're not predators either, Reed clarified. We're something else entirely. We're the species that looks at extinction and says not today. We're the ones who take impossible situations and make them merely difficult. We're problem solvers, Tom concluded. And from our perspective, everything is a problem waiting to be solved, including death itself. The session ended early that day. For the first time since the diplomatic conference began, the predator species seemed eager to return to their quarters. That evening, Alex overheard fragments of conversations in multiple alien languages. The translation devices picked up scattered phrases, psychological warfare, and evolutionary impossibility, and most tellingly, what have we invited to the galaxy? The humans had stopped being invisible. Now the question was whether that was good or bad for everyone involved. The final diplomatic session was scheduled to last 3 days. Instead, it took less than 6 hours to completely restructure the galactic power hierarchy. Alex sat quietly in the human delegation's corner, watching centuries of established order crumble in real time. It started when Gorthak made his demand during the opening statements. The massive Ravaki overseer rose to his full, intimidating height, scales gleaming under the chamber lights, and fixed the humans with his predatory stare. Enough games, he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had conquered dozens of star systems. "We have heard your stories of survival and resilience. Now tell us what your species truly fears. Every creature in the galaxy has something that makes it submit. What dominates humans?" The chamber fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems. Tom and Reed both turned to look at Alex, leaving the response to him. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of every alien gaze in the room. "You really want to know?" Alex asked quietly. "We demand to know?" Alex nodded thoughtfully, then smiled in a way that had been making the aliens uncomfortable for days. "All right. Let me tell you about the things that scare humans so much we invented them just to frighten ourselves." He began with zombies, not the shambling movie versions, but the original concept, the complete loss of human consciousness and free will, leaving only hunger and violence behind. "We're terrified of losing ourselves," he explained, "of becoming something that looks human but isn't anymore." The Vorth delegates flickered nervously between phases as Alex described vampires, former humans who could only sustain themselves by consuming others, trapped in eternal existence without hope of death or redemption. "Then there are the cosmic horrors," Alex continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "Beings so vast and alien that human minds can't process their existence without breaking down completely. We imagine creatures that exist partially outside reality itself, whose mere presence drives people insane." "Why?" asked one of the Threx speakers, its harmonic buzz wavering slightly. "Why create such things?" "Because we want to know if there's anything that could actually stop us," Alex said simply. "So we keep inventing worse and worse scenarios to test ourselves against." Tom stood up to join him. "We have a whole genre of stories about the end of civilization. Nuclear war, pandemic, diseases, artificial intelligence rebellion, asteroid impacts, alien invasion. We imagine every possible way our species could be wiped out." "And then?" Gorthak's voice had lost some of its commanding presence. "And then we figure out how to survive it," Reed said, rising from her chair. "Nuclear winter? We plan underground. Shelters and seed banks. Pandemic? We develop medical protocols and social distancing procedures. AI rebellion? We build in safeguards and kill switches. We even have stories about humans surviving the heat death of the universe," Alex added. "The complete end of physics as we know it. And in those stories, we're still finding ways to persist." The council chamber had become eerily quiet. The predator species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia were staring at three humans who had just casually described their species' approach to existential threats. "But here's what you really need to understand," Alex said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "These aren't just stories we tell for entertainment. They're training exercises." "Training for what?" The question came from a Vorth delegate whose crystalline form was flickering rapidly between phases. "For whatever comes next," Tom answered. "Every horror story is a thought experiment. Every disaster movie is a preparation drill. Every nightmare we invent is practice for dealing with something worse." Reed pulled out her tablet and displayed a series of historical records. "When our cities were destroyed by earthquakes, we developed building codes to make them earthquake-resistant. When diseases killed millions, we created global health monitoring systems. When our early space missions failed, we used the failures to design better spacecraft. We don't just adapt to threats," Alex continued. "We anticipate them. We imagine the worst possible scenarios and prepare for them in advance." Gorthak's golden eyes had lost their predatory gleam, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like concern. "Your species plans for threats that don't exist yet." "Every threat exists eventually," Tom said matter-of-factly. "We just like to be ready when it shows up." The Threx collective had stopped their synchronized movements entirely, each individual member now moving independently in what appeared to be agitation. Several were making the rustling paper sound continuously, creating an unsettling background noise. "There's something else you should know," Alex said, noticing how the aliens were reacting. "We don't just prepare for external threats, we prepare for ourselves." "Explain," demanded Gorthak, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Humans are dangerous to other humans. We know this. So we create systems to control our own destructive impulses. Laws, governments, social contracts. We build safeguards against our own nature." Reed nodded. "We study our own psychology, map our cognitive biases, identify our behavioral weaknesses. Then we design institutions to compensate for them. We assume humans will be selfish, violent, and short-sighted," Tom added. "Then we build societies that function despite those flaws." "You plan for your own species to fail?" asked a Vorth delegate, its crystalline voice carrying disbelief. "We plan for humans to be human," Alex corrected. "Which means we'll make mistakes, act irrationally, and sometimes choose personal gain over group survival. So we create systems that still work when people behave badly." The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. The predator species were beginning to understand that they weren't dealing with a typical prey species, or even a typical predator species. They were facing something that had spent thousands of years preparing for every possible threat, including threats from themselves. "What do you want from us?" Gorthak asked quietly. "Nothing," Reed said with a slight shrug. "We came here to learn about galactic civilization and establish diplomatic relations. That's all." "You're not here to conquer?" "Why would we want to conquer you?" Alex asked, genuinely puzzled. "You're already doing a fine job running your respective territories. We'd rather trade with you, learn from you, maybe share some technologies." "Besides," Tom added with a casual smile, "conquest is inefficient. It's much easier to make friends and business partners than it is to manage hostile, occupied populations." The predator species exchanged glances that conveyed more meaning than words. These humans weren't just dangerous, they were pragmatically dangerous. They had spent millennia learning to survive and thrive, and they approached everything, including diplomacy, with the same methodical preparation they brought to horror stories and disaster planning. "We need to discuss this among ourselves," announced the lead Threx speaker, its harmonic buzz wavering slightly. "Of course," Reed said politely. "We'll be in our quarters if you need us." The humans gathered their materials and walked out of the council chamber with the same quiet dignity they'd maintained throughout the conference. Behind them, they left 3 of the galaxy's most feared predator species staring at empty chairs and trying to process what they'd just learned. The recess lasted 18 hours. When the session reconvened, the seating arrangement had changed dramatically. The humans found themselves moved to the center tier, with the former apex predators arranged around them in what looked suspiciously like a defensive formation. Gorthak spoke first, his massive form somehow diminished despite his physical size. "The Council has reached certain conclusions about humanity's place in galactic civilization." "Oh?" Reed kept her voice neutral. "Your species will be granted full membership status with all associated rights and privileges. Trade agreements will be established on terms favorable to human interests. Territorial boundaries will be negotiated to ensure adequate space for human expansion." Alex blinked in surprise. They'd expected to spend months or years earning basic recognition. "That's very generous." "It's pragmatic," corrected a Vorth delegate. "Your species represents a destabilizing factor in galactic politics. It's better to have you as allies than as unknowns." The Threx Collective spoke in perfect unison for the first time in days. "We have concluded that humans are not prey species, nor are they traditional predators. You are something new." "What would you call us?" Tom asked with genuine curiosity. Gorthak was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying the human delegation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or possibly fear. "Survivors," he said simply. "You are the species that refuses to die." The formal agreements were signed that afternoon. Humanity was granted immediate recognition as a major galactic power, with territorial rights, trade privileges, and most importantly, a seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. As the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, Alex found himself approached by individual members of the predator species. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. "Tell me," Gorthak said during their final private meeting, "are there more humans like you?" 7 billion of us last count," Alex replied cheerfully. The massive Ravaki was quiet for several heartbeats. 7 billion. Give or take a few million. Population still growing. That evening, as their ship prepared for departure, Tom intercepted a communication between the station and the Ravaki homeworld. The translation was fragmentary, but the key phrase came through clearly. "Recommend immediate reclassification. Status change from harmless to unknown threat level." Reed was updating her mission reports when she noticed similar communications from the other delegations. The Threx Collective was describing humans as evolutionary impossibility requiring further study. The Vorth were more direct. Species exhibits anomalous survival characteristics. Recommend extreme caution in future interactions. As their ship pulled away from Harmony Ridge Station, Alex stood at the observation deck watching the massive structure shrink into the distance. Behind them, they left 3 civilizations that had spent the week fundamentally reassessing their understanding of what it meant to be an apex predator. The humans had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. Without firing a shot, without making a single threat, without even raising their voices, they had convinced the galaxy's most dangerous species to step aside and make room. They had done it with nothing but stories. Reed joined Alex at the observation deck as Earth's sun became visible in the distance. "Think they'll leave us alone?" "I think they'll be very polite when they visit," Alex said thoughtfully. "They've figured out that we're not prey, and they're not entirely sure what that makes us." Tom appeared beside them, grinning broadly. "Did you see the final diplomatic classification they assigned to humanity?" "No. What did they put down?" Tom pulled out his tablet and read from the official document. Species designation, unknown. Threat assessment, approach with extreme caution. Additional notes, humans appear to treat extinction as a temporary inconvenience. Alex laughed, a sound that would have made the aliens even more nervous if they'd heard it. "That's actually pretty accurate." As their ship headed home, carrying news that would forever change humanity's place in the galaxy, the 3 humans settled in for the long journey. They had stories to tell when they got back to Earth. Stories about how to convince apex predators to fear their prey. Stories about how humans had talked their way to the top of the galactic food chain. And most importantly, stories about how the galaxy had just learned that humans were the species that told scary stories to their nightmares.